In the summer of 1968, a beautiful black man boarded a New York subway. He took a seat, pulled out his newspaper as if he was just a normal citizen. 2 days prior, the man who happened to be the number 5 ranked tennis player in the world became the first and only black man to win the U.S. Open. It was one of few bright spots for black people at the time, but it mostly went uncelebrated. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter much. We had lost our heroes Medgar and Malcolm and Martin just a few months prior. We technically had voting rights, but it didn't change hearts and minds. The Panthers and the rest of Black America were looking for healing and answers. So who cared about a tennis player, especially one who wasn't considered outspoken enough? What many failed to realize at the time was that Arthur Ashe's very existence in professional tennis was in and of itself a protest. But a champion is a champion even if no one cheers. So quietly and gracefully, he continued. Arthur Ashe became the first and only black man to be ranked number 1 on the ATP Tour, the first and only black man to win Australian Open in 1970. In order to bring light to the ills of apartheid, Arthur Ashe played the South African Open in 1973, and at the same time showing young black South African children what royalty looked like while their king was in prison. In 1975, he became the first and only black man to win Wimbledon, beating Jimmy Connors, who was considered tennis god at the time. Ever passionate about kids and expanding the sport he loved, Arthur Ashe met an 11-year-old Yannick Noah on a trip to Cameroon. He later paid for Yannick Noah's training, and in 1983, Yannick Noah became the first and only black man to win his home slam, the French Open. With Dick Bollettieri, Ashe started the Ashe Bollettieri program in 1978, putting tennis rackets in the hands of thousands of inner-city kids, later fueling what is now called the Arthur Ashe Kids Day, a day of fun with kids and their tennis pro heroes that marks the beginning of every U.S. Open. Despite having lived his life with the utmost grace, Arthur Ashe was not afforded the same dignity. When a journalist learned of his HIV diagnosis, he was forced to make a public announcement in 1992. Ashe had contracted the virus after having a quadruple bypass at the age of only 36. It would seem that the weight of a lifetime of racism and having to measure his words when he wanted to scream quite literally broke his heart. But it didn't stop it. Rather than going into hiding, Arthur Ashe became one of the world's greatest HIV activists, bringing awareness to communities disproportionately affected by the disease, and likely helping to save thousands of lives, before the disease made him an ancestor far too soon. So yes, that beautiful black man, that champion, that king, went unnoticed that day. But in 1997, Arthur Ashe Stadium became the largest and loudest in tennis, seating nearly 24,000 people. And every time players walk out on the center court at the U.S. Open, announcers must speak the name, Arthur Ashe. I'd like to believe that the cheers coming from the crowd are not just for the players on the court, but for the man who's the fabric of its foundation. And that foundation has held the generations of champions that Arthur Ashe and Althea Gibson helped to inspire. When we as sports fans consider our favorite athletes, we mostly point to stats and trophies. But that's not what makes champions. Heart does.